Hi, I'm John Leonard.
And I'm Dan Leonard.
And we're very excited to start this podcast and delve into topics that interest us and hopefully spark your interest as well.
This is our first attempt at hosting a podcast, and we're still very green at it, so bear with us as we muddle our way through and attempt to get better. Without further ado, let's start the show. Greetings, and welcome to the Black Flame Podcast, where history and legends collide, where cryptids, the supernatural, and the paranormal run free.
We are your hosts, Dan and John Leonard, and we are here to bring you stories of haunted places, creepy cryptids, and harrowing legends. So sit back and let us guide you through the world of the unexplained.
Tonight we'll be covering the Witches of Plain Dealing and the legend of Moll Dyer.
So stick around and learn more about these witches of Maryland.
Maryland's Eastern Shore is a renowned tourist destination known for its scenic waterways, quaint historic towns, and authentic Chesapeake Bay cuisine. It's known by many as the perfect example of quiet, small-town America. What many don't know is that this serene rural landscape served as the backdrop for some of Maryland's most chilling and mysterious events. Back in the 1600s, a 200-acre plot of land known as Plain Dealing was surveyed for a man named Joseph Winslow in an area known today as Royal Oak in Talbot County. This plot sat on the western side of a large creek with which it shares its name. It is said that the namesake of the plot and the adjoining creek come from the Native Americans who inhabited the area and used it to conduct business with white or plain people who carved out their stake in the land. The community surrounding Plain Dealing were mostly Quakers who lived peacefully alongside the Choptank Algonquins, but don't let the quiet settlement fool you. Plain Dealing would soon come to be known for some rather dark characters. Jumping forward about 100 years to 1712, Talbot County is a prosperous area with thriving boat communities, seafood businesses, and large working farms. The general lifestyle is rooted in hard work and accentuated with a devotion to God. Although most citizens in the area are godly folks, some believe that a few may have been in league with the devil himself. From the time of its inception to modern days, Maryland has played host to only 5 formal witch trials, the last witch trial recorded in court documents being that of a woman named Virtue Vial of Plain Dealing. The trial was held in Annapolis and began on August 12, 1712. The court documents claim that Virtue was, and I quote, seduced by the devil most wickedly, and diabolically did use, practice, and exercise witchcraft, whereby and wherewith she did waste, consume, and pine the body of a certain Eleanor Moore. They go on, her most wicked and diabolical use, practice, and exercise of witchcraft, the tongue of the said Eleanor Moore, rendering her mouth speechless and lame. In modern terms, the witnesses claim that Virtue bewitched Eleanor, making her waste away and lose her ability to speak. She was indicted and held in prison until the jury was able to reach a verdict on October 7th of the same year. They determined she was not guilty and was set free on the condition that she pay her court fees. The 12 jurors were paid 3,000 pounds of tobacco for their service. This is the last time we see Virtue's name in any public record, so we must assume that she went back to Plain Dealing to live out the rest of her life. Even though this is the last formal witch trial recorded in Maryland documents, that doesn't mean that it's the last time someone was accused of witchcraft. Plain Dealing still has one more witchy tie left to be revealed. Sometime after Virtue's trial, a man named Squire Robert Ungle built a large mansion in the style of an English manor with sprawling grounds and a family cemetery on Plain Dealing. The story goes that through some accident, or as the rumors would have you believe, a cold-blooded murder, Robert fell over the hand-carved balusters from the second floor and broke his neck, leaving an eternal blood stain on the surface below that no one has ever been able to remove. After his death, the neglected mansion fell into disrepair. It states in Land of Legendary Lore by Prentice Ingram that, and I quote, "Its handsome paneling and carving begun to decay, its walls to become moss-grown, its spreading roof to show its age. The old furniture became covered with dust. The old portraits of well-born men and women in powdered wigs and queue were stained and moldy. The family burying ground just across the lawn upon the banks of the creek grew up dense and dank with weeds and trees, while the vaults cracked open and revealed their ghostly occupants to the inquisitive one who ventured near. On property adjoining the dilapidated Ungle estate, a wealthy tobacco farmer named Samuel Chamberlain built his home in 1753. On the edge of his property, near the old Ungle burying ground, sat an abandoned shack from the time of the Ungle mansion's heyday. It is said that in his old age, Samuel allowed a woman named Katie Colburn to take up residence. Katie, or Witch Katie, as she came to be known, was often referred to as the last of her kind in Talbot County, supposedly the only person left still practicing witchcraft in the area. She was described as being a, and I quote, "poor old creature, lonely, deformed, repulsively ugly, and wretchedly poor." She would reportedly terrorize the local children and African-American residents. The latter would do their best to avoid her and even went as far as wearing charms made of, and again, I quote, "the left hind foot of a rabbit killed at the dark of the moon to avoid being hoodooed by her black magic." One day, the locals around the estate noticed that they hadn't seen Katie around in some time. As it turns out, they never would again. I don't imagine much searching was done for a supposed missing witch, but they never found her body in the old shack or the surrounding area. The story, however, doesn't end there. Shortly after Witch Katie went missing, a young boy helping his father tend to his farm went to gather the cows who were grazing near the old burying ground. When he reached the cemetery, he was startled to see a man dressed in a stately, antique manner with a white beard, a high-crowned hat, and ruffled clothing. The man tried to speak to the boy, but he turned and ran home to tell his father, who didn't believe his story. The boy would go back every day, seeing the same man and becoming less and less afraid of him, until finally he spoke to the man. In response, the man walked to a particular spot in the burying ground and pointed down, stomping his foot at the same time. The two replayed this same interaction for a few days in a row, and the boy was eventually led by the man into the old mansion, where he pointed up at one of the portraits on the wall. The boy saw some resemblance of the portrait in the man's face. Shortly after that encounter, the boy and his family were making a visit to an estate called Bondfield in the nearby town of Oxford. Hanging on the walls inside Bondfield were old portraits, one of which the boy excitedly pointed to, claiming that that's the man he's been seeing in the cemetery. The subject of the portrait, of course, was that of Squire Robert Ungles. After this experience, he was finally able to convince his parents to come and see the man for themselves. They did so on multiple occasions, and every time the boy would exclaim, "There he is, there's the man!" But neither of his parents could see him. Thinking there might be something to his claims, or just to calm the boy down, his father took a shovel to the spot where Robert was supposedly pointing and started digging. The following day, the neighbors came out to check the stories of the boy's ghostly encounter and found a freshly dug hole in the ground with a rectangular void at the bottom of it, almost as if a chest was lifted out of the cavity. The family, previously very poor, suddenly purchased a large tract of land known as Londonderry shortly after the excavation, which raised all the neighbors' eyebrows and suspicions that the ghost of Robert Ungle had led them to a stash of his long-forgotten treasure, but they would never admit to it. Following this unexpected large purchase, stumps were being removed in the plain dealing grounds, and beneath one of the larger trees, they found a large boulder that, and I quote, "proved to be in two pieces, accurately fitted together, between which lay a stained manuscript, the only words decipherable being money and a partially obliterated date." The story of the manuscript got out, and a mob formed to make a raid on the property to dig up more buried treasure, but left very quickly, claiming that the ghost had scared them away. Interest in finding long-lost riches in the area died down, but the whispers of ghosts and witches carried on through the centuries. Some claim that the ghost of Robert Ungles was waiting for Witch Katie to leave before revealing his buried treasure. Others believe that Katie summoned him for dark purposes before being spirited away. But the fact that Virtue Vial and Katie Colburn, both suspected witches, lived on the same tract of land and water almost a century apart might point to something deeper and darker than we could ever imagine. But one thing is perfectly clear: the history surrounding plain dealing is anything but ordinary. So that is the story of the Witches of Plain Dealing, along with a little ghost story tied in there.
I've heard about this story very briefly, and it was just, I heard about it. I didn't read into it or anything like that, but I've heard about it, and that's it. Other than that, no one seems to know about it, it seems like.
Yeah, I think it's not that well known. It doesn't get talked about a whole lot around here. And I think it's a pretty significant fact, just that there aren't that many, you don't hear about that many people being accused of witches in Maryland. And we have 2 right there.
Yeah, 2
that
10 minutes
close.
from my house.
Right. And I don't think that, I really don't know why, actually. Because you'd think it'd be a more popular story. And back in the day it was, because a lot of my sources that I went back to were these old magazine articles and clippings from books back in from the 1800s. So it was obviously a legend back then. And I'm speaking about Katie Colburn there, and the whole ghost story. That was another thing I wanted to touch on too. So the ghost story tied in with Katie Colburn, or that starts kind of right after she goes missing. There's a couple of different interpretations of that, or a couple of different versions, I should say, of that story out there. And the one that I had researched here was pulled together from multiple sources from back in the 1800s that were reporting on this. But if you go look at Mindy Burgoyne's book, I am blanking on the name and I apologize for that. I think it's Chesapeake Ghosts, I want to say. So Mindy Burgoyne, the local author, she had it written down in a different way where the Valiant brothers were involved with the treasure and the ghost. And so her claimed version of it is that the treasure was buried in the ground and a ghost told one of the Valiant brothers to go look for the treasure. And so him and his brother both dug down and found the treasure. But upon finding it, the one brother who got the message from the ghost to dig down killed the other one. And after killing him, felt so bad that he put his brother's body down on the ground, put the treasure back on top, and buried it in. And later, a ghost was telling the boy to go dig, but when they dug down, they only found rocks.
Right.
And so I couldn't find any mention of the Valiant brothers in the tellings that I was reading from the 1800s, so I just went with that. I'm not saying her version is inaccurate. I'd like to know what her sources were, but that was what I was able to glean from the information I could find. And I think it's interesting, but it's so old, and I think it's been one of those stories that's kind of been told and told and told, because I mean, we're talking all this happening in the 1700s.
I mean, that's like any story told from back in the day, It's like playing that game Telephone.
Yep.
By the time you get to the end person, after even just 10 people, you go through, the story's different. Now imagine going through from the 1700s to 2021.
And supposedly, so the rock that they pulled up out of the ground, that big boulder that was in 2 pieces with the manuscript in between, that was supposedly, it says in the story, put out by the road. I don't know what road that is, and I would love to find it if it's still there, because there's only so many roads back here.
Yeah.
And so I think it'd be interesting to see if we could find that and have to take a drive. Yeah, I just thought it was interesting, all that history right there between Virtue Vile and Katie Colburn, both being accused as witches. And again, Virtue was the last one to be taken to trial in Maryland,
right,
for being a witch. So
I just think it's crazy that not many people know about this story, obviously. Not many Marylanders, I should say, know about this story. Because you know how stories go when you're kids, and kids talk about stories that happened a long time ago that their parents told them, but our parents never told any of this. Pop-Pop never told us any of this. Our family never told us anything about this. And I wonder if it's one of those things that just gets lost in history because of the darkness of it, or it's just something that just slips through the cracks. But I'm interested to know why no one else knows about it, because that's talk worthy, I think.
Oh, I think so too. I mean, it's a fun story for one thing, regardless of whether or not it's true.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of it was fact based from what I could find. I mean, some kind, like there was actually a receipt for that land that was bought.
Yeah.
So that actually happened. There was a family there that somehow came into some money that bought land. So there is some kernel of truth in this story, no matter how much it might be stretched. But one thing I think is pretty clear, that they don't really know if Katie Colburn was a witch. I saw some people alluding to it as more like a scary story to keep kids from going out in the woods and coming home before dark, that kind of thing. But the fact that the African Americans would actually make charms and stuff to try to, to
ward off the spirits, I guess. The witches,
I find that really interesting. But just it's such an innocuous piece of land now. There's nothing, I mean, it's mostly woods and, a couple of open fields and stuff like that, but it's nothing, it doesn't seem particularly spooky or weird. So when you're just driving through there, you'd never know it. Maybe it'll have a different lens on it, going through there now. Well,
especially because we're from here too. We've been driving down those roads for years. So everything looks different when you're from here, when you grow up here. Everything looks kind of different. Don't look as spooky as what some people might see it as,
Yeah. But it's just, I don't know. If someone were to drive by, you'd never know.
No.
That anything like that. And I guess it's like that with most places until you know the history behind it, because that can kind of plant the seed in your head that, right, something crazy.
Now, some places do look like legit scary.
Right.
Some places had that feel, but it's just not one of them.
No. I just think it's so weird that the two supposed witches, I should say, within the same tract of land, not only in the same county, but it's Royal Oak. It's not that big.
No.
Especially the area they're talking about playing deal in. It's just a 200-acre plot.
Right.
And it's only so big. But two witches 100 years apart from each other, right there in our backyard.
Yeah. And
a ghost story tied to it. I think that was interesting too, how I don't really quite know how to fit it together. But that's what it says is pretty much as soon as Katie Colburn goes missing, this ghost man, or the ghost of Robert Ungles, comes on the scene. So it's peculiar, and that's how it was in pretty much every version I could find that mentioned Katie. And then they almost never go, if one gets brought up, the other one is tied to it.
Right.
And it's really strange because they don't necessarily have anything to do with each other, but the timeline is peculiar, how as soon as she's gone, here comes this ghost.
Yeah.
That only the boy can see.
Yeah. Makes you think that maybe she was a witch, and for some reason that ghost was scared to come around the witch, I guess, and as soon as the so-called witch goes away, the ghost can come freely now without worrying or something. I don't know.
Right.
But that's just the way it seems.
That's from the way that I kind of interpret it was that Robert Ungles actually, he was helping this poor family, basically.
Right.
They were poor farmers.
Yeah.
And it kind of seems like he knew that Katie was this mean person. At least we know that much. She, seemed like a mean person, according to all reports. And so maybe he was just waiting around till she would get out. And then once she finally did, he thought, okay, I'm going to help these family out now. Now there's another version of the story as well that claims that the family, the Chamberlains, were descendants of the Ungles, and that the family on the farm were actually Chamberlains. And so there's a lot of speculation that could be made there. There are so many different versions of it. That one would almost kind of make sense, because if the family were descendants of Squire Ungles, then obviously he'd be like, oh, hey, look, my great grandkids, here's some money for you.
Right.
But other than that, it's weird. It's bizarre. And I just thought it was a really fun story to kind of throw together and research, especially for us specifically, because it's right here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing that surprises me the most, is how I can't get over the fact that I haven't heard of this outside of anyone local talking to. I've talked just family members and other local friends. I've never heard anyone talk about this story. I think I've heard about it years ago through maybe a book or something, like Haunted Maryland, I think is what it was, or something. It hinted towards that. But I never really looked into the story, and it never gets told. And I wonder why it never gets told.
I don't know. So hopefully we can broadcast this and make it more well known.
Yeah.
Because I think it's something that kind of gives a little more flavor to the area in a different direction than it kind of has,
Yeah, because now it's growing into this more touristy town, light, playful town, quiet. Doesn't have that kind of spooky feeling to it, and I don't think they want that spooky feeling to it. But that's history. You can't get around the history of this area.
Right. And I mean, there's plenty of, we live just outside the town of St. Michael's, and there is plenty of old historic places in there that are supposedly haunted.
Cannonball House.
Yeah, Cannonball House. There's a lot of them. And that it still really doesn't get talked about that much. There are ghost tours you can go on, I think actually led by Mindy Burgoyne or her company. But other than that, it's not, nobody really talks about it.
No. And I wonder why, if it just, like I say, it slips through the cracks, or I don't know.
We're doing all we can right now. This is hopefully going to help spread some kind of word about it.
Yeah.
But
I think it's just an interesting story that everyone should hear. Especially everyone that lives here should know it, because I know a lot of people don't know this story. A lot of locals don't know it.
No. And it might pique someone's interest who isn't even from around here. You know, it's just one of those weird, to the outsider, it's just this small town in Maryland that kind of has a weird story that not a lot of people talk about.
Yeah.
So
a witch trial story, even of all things.
Right. And even if that's all that it is, so be it.
Yeah, that's true. But I don't know. I wish this story were more told through the years of when we were growing up. I think that would be cool to know, because we have a lot of historical places down here. Frederick Douglass, where he was kept, they have that, I think, around Cambridge. And then Mount Misery. There's a lot of historical buildings around here. In a maritime museum, like you say, there's a couple haunted tours. There's a lot of historic things. But why, this part of history doesn't get brought up, and it piques my interest of why not.
Well, and it also makes me wonder, because the area now today is nothing but private land. And so there's no real, kind of meeting place. There's no location, and it doesn't even get specific in these stories. It's just plain dealing, which is not a humongous tract of land, but it's enough that we don't have any centralized point of where these people lived or any of this occurred. It's the same creek and the same tract of land. Its face has changed for sure, but the legend just seems to persist through time, and I want to give it a boost.
Yeah, share a little light on it.
Yeah, let's get this thing out there. I want people to know about it.
I mean, they should, especially locals. It's part of history. So I feel like, you should know where you live.
Yeah, definitely. I just think it's interesting digging into the history of anywhere, but when you can stand in a spot and know what happened there hundreds of years ago, it just makes it that much more interesting. And especially when there's something spooky like a ghost story tied to it, because apparently that mansion isn't standing anymore. So
that's what I was going to ask.
I think they kind of have a rough idea of, or supposedly another house was built on top of it, but I could not find anywhere which one that was. I want to go driving around back there and just take a look and see what we can find, but apparently it's all private land now. Yeah, so there's no real place to get off and walk around and explore or anything, but just the tale by itself is intriguing enough to me.
Oh yeah, for sure.
This has been the curious tale of the witches of Plain Dealing. Stick around for the legend of Moll Dyer.
What is now a small town known for its seafood industry, quaint restaurants, and historical buildings also is a town that has a dark history behind it. This is the story of the Witch of Leonardtown. Just an hour and a half southwest of Washington, D.C., lies a small town on the Pocomoke River known as Leonardtown. Located in St. Mary's County, it was first colonized in the 17th century. Before settlers arrived, this location was a wooded area that was populated by the Piscataway Native American tribe. But when the English settled here, they also brought with them some of their superstitions, one of them being witchcraft. In the 1600s, before Leonardtown got its name, it was home to a small population of English settlers. One of these settlers was a woman who lived on the outside of town in a small hut. Her name was Moll Dyer. Her past is still a mystery to this day. No one truly knows the origins of her. Moll lived in isolation. She also had a shadowy past and was known as an herbal healer. Because of this, she was looked at by the townspeople as an outcast. In his book, Old Maryland's Landmarks, Robert Pogue states that she would forage for herbs and things to use in her charms or spells. But all the mysterious behavior she was doing had some of the townsfolk thinking she could be a witch. The year 1697 was an abnormally cold year, cooler than the years past, and because of the severe temperatures, the harvest of crops was very poor. But it was common back then to blame the bad weather on supernatural forces. In this case, there were talks that the witch Moll Dyer had cursed the town with a severely cold winter and a bad crop turnout. Soon the talks of her being a witch turned into angry accusations, and the townsfolk wanted to get rid of Moll Dyer forever. Unlike the Salem witch trials of 1692, when the so-called witches had a chance to plead their case, Moll Dyer wouldn't get this opportunity. With torches, the townsfolk burned her cabin and reportedly yelled, quote, "Burn the witch." But she escaped the burning building and fled into the nearby woods. Thinking she had died in the house, the townsfolk carried on with life. But a few days later, Moll Dyer's body was discovered in the woods. She was frozen to death in the harsh winter temperatures. But she was frozen in an unusual position. She was found kneeling on a rock with one hand reaching toward the sky, while the other hand was frozen to the rock, leaving an indent on the rock where her knee and her hand laid. The townsfolk swore that she had cursed them in death and would haunt them forever. The rock now sits in front of St. Mary's County Historical Society, Tudor Hall. Today you can go and see the rock for yourselves. Some who have visited the rock say that you will get a sick feeling in your stomach. Others claim that photos taken of the rock won't develop or the camera will malfunction. Could these mysterious happenings surrounding the rock be from the dark past associated with it? Or is it the curse that Moll Dyer had put on the rock that cold winter in 1697? But the story doesn't end here. There's a spooky wooded area near the town close to Moll Dyer Road. This is the area that locals believed was where she had her cabin. One report tells a story of a woman and her friends went into the woods to explore on a nice sunny day. When they got into the woods, a huge thunderstorm erupted out of nowhere. As soon as the group ran out of the woods, the storm was gone and the sun was shining again. They believed it was Moll Dyer's ghost running them off. Another report comes from a few local hunters who claim that they have seen the apparition of Moll Dyer's ghost herself in the woods. The legend of Moll Dyer is so popular that they named a road after her. Surrounding this road is supposedly haunted woods, where it was believed that she had her home. The locals here travel this road with caution, and rightfully so. There have been a number of unexplained accidents on this road, and unfortunately, some of these accidents were fatal. One report from Moll Dyer's Run, which is a kayaking stream that runs from Brenton Bay and ends parallel to Moll Dyer Road. The report said that in 1970, a hunter saw a very dense cylindrical-shaped fog patch with a light emerging from it, cross the stream, move across the wind, not with the wind, across the wind, and went south, and it did the same motion 2 times. Another freaky statement is that an unusual number of lightning strikes has been reported near Moll Dyer Road, more than in the surrounding area.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I know you've been to St. Mary's before.
Oh yeah, I spent a lot of time down there. It's not not quite, in St. Mary's. I've been in St. Mary's County. I've never actually driven into Leonardtown, though.
I've driven around it.
We need to make a trip out there.
Yeah, it's about 3 hours for us.
Yeah, I want to go see The Rock.
I do too.
I've talked about it a lot, and I always joke, whenever I'd be driving down there and see the sign and be like, that's my town right there. You see that?
I would too, yeah.
But it's another interesting story that I feel like, actually the first place I heard that story was on the Weather Channel.
Really?
Yeah, they had this segment. It must have been during October. And they had a section running kind of in between weather forecasts about different, spooky tales across America. And one of them was the Moll Dyer witch. And I just remember sitting there listening to it. And then they said Leonardtown, Maryland. I was like, what the heck? And so it's another just kind of in-state legend for us, at least. It's across the bay. I mean, it's such an attractive story, especially because we still have that rock that they believe was the one that she was kneeling on. I think they said it weighs like over 300 pounds or something, and they
reports
originally
come over 800 pounds.
800. So I read that wrong.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah,
because they moved it from out from in the woods to originally in front of the jailhouse, right?
So this isn't. They don't know for sure if this is the actual rock. They're not sure yet. They're actually still trying to find out if they can find the original rock right now. But they pulled this one out in 1970 thinking that it was the rock. And it could be, but they doubt it is. And that you're right, they put it in front of the old jail, the old historical jail in St. Mary's County. And they just recently moved it now in front of the Historical Society now.
Right, that was just a couple weeks ago at this point, in March.
Yeah. The first place I heard about this story was on Travel Channel.
Huh.
It was Mysteries at the Museum.
Was it really?
Yes, it was.
That's a great show.
Yeah, and I heard this story on there. He said Leonardtown, Maryland, and I was like, Maryland? That's cool. Made it on TV.
Yeah.
And the more I got into the story, the more interesting it got, because she never got, this was, 5 years after the Salem witch trials?
Right.
So it makes me think, and I want to talk to a historian about it if I can. Do they think that the townsfolk of Leonardtown caught wind of the Salem witch trials 5 years afterwards?
Oh, I'm sure, because I think that was nationwide news at that point, even though, news was crawling back then compared to how quickly it's spread now.
Right.
I would imagine that they would definitely know about it.
Yeah. And it makes me think that she didn't get a trial. There was no trial done at all. None. They just wanted to get rid of her that night, so they burned her house down, thinking that she was in there. And what makes me think is they don't want a trial because look how the Salem witch trials turned out. That turned into a bloodbath.
Right.
That a lot of people that weren't firstly accused all of a sudden got accused, and like I say, it turned into a bloodbath. And I think people didn't want that on their hands, and they thought something spooky was going on because she was looked at as an outsider in the first place. She was, like I said, an herbal healer. She would forage for all kinds of mushrooms and all kinds of weird herbs she could find to make she would report them as spells or charms, is what she would put. But she was a healer.
Right. And
she was abnormally tall for a woman back then, too, which made people a little more leery of her anyway. But because of that shady past, they don't know where she came from originally. Not much is known about Moll Dyer. Moll probably isn't even her name. It was probably a nickname for Marion. I looked it up.
Right.
So there's no really historical evidence of Moll Dyer at all. But there are some names Marion Dyer. So that's who they think was Moll Dyer. But as far as where she's from, people speculate she's from Ireland, she's from England, she's from France. They don't know. They don't know where she's originally from. All they know is that she's a settler and she's an herbal healer, an outcast in the town. And of course, back then, like I stated, when they didn't get a good crop turnout or things went kind of wonky in the town, they always blamed it on supernatural forces,
Right.
Spirits at play.
And obviously the easy target is the outcast.
Right.
And that's usually most of the time when it comes to, now there are some exceptions in Salem, but the majority of witch accusations are usually against people that they call, or women specifically, they call them spinsters. They're unmarried women. They're typically a bit older, which makes them an outcast of the community. If you weren't married and you were a woman and you were of age, you were considered to be, an outcast.
Right.
It was almost shameful to not be married by the time you were of age. And so it just made him an easy target, I think, and especially someone like her who was a healer, but probably, more along the lines of what we would consider Wicca today, the Wiccans, who use herbal remedies and, things from nature basically to try to heal.
Right.
Even though the intentions aren't bad, it doesn't totally fall in line with the general zeitgeist of the time.
Especially back in 1697.
Right. And that's what I mean. I think it's way more accepted now than it was back then. Obviously, we don't have witch trials for witches nowadays.
Right.
And it's easy because back then, if you were a godly person, it was a very specific thing to be, and you wouldn't go out and use all these herbal remedies and stuff like that. You wouldn't go off and live by yourself, and
right.
Back then, religion was and still is, I think to this day, a source for community and being together and all this. So if someone is not part of that community necessarily, then it just makes them an easy target. They're just walking around with a red X on their back.
Oh, no doubt.
Waiting to take the blame for something that goes wrong.
Right. And the other freaky thing was it was a boy that found her in the woods a couple days after he was searching for lost cattle and found her, but she was reportedly frozen, kneeling with a hand up in the air, which is strange.
That is weird.
Isn't that weird?
No, I mean, it's weird to find someone frozen. Like you were saying, it must have been a very cold winter for someone to be frozen in a position like that.
I mean, how long does it take to freeze?
Sitting up like that.
Right.
I mean, that's a kind of a creepy part of the legend. And I think that can be interpreted in two ways. Either she had her one hand up praying to God.
Yes, right.
Or as the legend and the creepier side of things would have you believe, she was putting that curse on the land, which the whole, a high amount of lightning strikes in that area. That is interesting.
Yeah, more than in the surrounding area.
That's so weird.
Which is strange. And so reportedly years after Moll had died, the crops still wouldn't grow like they did before.
Huh.
They still wouldn't grow as well after she died. So that's left the townspeople thinking that she did leave a curse, Right. And they were scared that they were going to haunt her in death too. And now there are reports of ghost stories surrounding it. Like the coolest one that I came over was the cylindrical fog shape that had a light. The exact report was a light emerging about 8 inches below the top of it. And it moved across the wind. So not with it, but across the wind on the south, moved to the south, moved across the wind, across the creek, down south. And it came back and did that motion twice. So not just once, but twice, and made that movement.
That would be enough to make you either want to nowadays pull your phone out and take pictures or just flat out turn and run.
Yeah.
I mean, that's weird.
Especially for it to do it twice, not just once. You could see once being like, that was a freaky thing. Maybe it was a weird gust of wind that came through, but to have it go back twice and a light emerging from it.
Yeah, that's odd.
That's the strange thing. And it floated over the water. So it's not like it's someone in the woods because it floated over the water.
Right.
That was the coolest report that I could find. That was back in 1970.
That's pretty crazy. So that's fairly recent compared to the time of Moll Dyer anyway.
Right. And there were reports that it wasn't known for a fact. Like I say, there's not much known specific, like there's not much history surrounding her herself. There were reports that she had a little white dog, and some people on the road with a lot of the road accidents say that they swerved to miss a dog, or they saw a dog that caused them to have the accident. Whoa. And then the dog wasn't there. So there have been a lot, like I say, the locals drive carefully on that road, apparently, because there have been a lot of car crashes on that road, and some of them, unfortunately, are fatal.
That's crazy.
And some of them surround people saying a dog caused it. They were swerving to miss a dog or something, But we don't know for sure if she had a dog or not. There's so much loose ends on who she was because she was such an outcast.
Right.
that she just wasn't. It's almost like she wasn't part of society.
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, obviously, she didn't have any kids
That we know of.
That we know of. Because that would be interesting to find out as well if there are any descendants. But
there are descendants of Dyers. I did find one source. They said that they had like a Marion Dyer years back. And that could be the Moll Dyer, because Moll wasn't her name. Obviously, it was most likely a nickname for Marion.
Right.
I find this story really crazy because she didn't get a trial. How quickly all these whispers about her being a witch just turned so fast into anger, and just they wanted her gone that night. So they burned her house down, and she got out.
That's frontier justice, mob mentality.
Yeah.
Take it in your own hands. I think that was definitely way more popular back then. But yeah, no, that's disturbing. I mean, to think that you could work people up into a frenzy like that over some bad weather and some, dead crops, that you would go and try to burn someone's house down.
Kill them. Because they thought that she died in the fire. They didn't know that she escaped into the woods.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
That is something.
Yeah.
Intense. It's a shame, too.
It is.
From a, humanitarian aspect.
Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, like the story you were covering, there were trials done, and if I'm not mistaken, one of them was let free.
Yeah, so and just going over generally the history of witch trials in Maryland, only one person was ever actually convicted and executed as a witch.
Right.
There was another man who was convicted of witchcraft and actually was on the gallows with the noose around his neck.
Oh, jeez.
And then the governor pardoned him at the last minute. So, yeah. So, just in the nick of time.
Sweet pie.
Yeah, but definitely gave him a scare.
Can you imagine what that guy had to say when he got off that gallows? He must have been like your last day of work when you're tired. Just giving the fingers to everyone.
Yeah.
Screw you guys. I'm leaving here. You crazy heathens.
Screw you. Screw you.
I'm getting out of this town. Crazy
I'm gonna
bunch of...
curse you. I mean, no.
They probably waited because, if he spoke up, probably would be like, all right, get back up there.
Yeah.
He was probably just walked away.
I can just
got
see him
home, just packing his stuff up, really mad, like tossing stuff in his bag, punching clothes in there, like, I'm leaving this crazy freaking town.
Sons of bitches trying to kill me. I can see him just walking away from the gallows, just like mumbling, like, God damn,
yeah,
freaking people with them. They're like, hey, he's putting a curse on us.
But no, I've heard of this story. And this is a well-known one because you look up, everyone knows about the Moll Dyer Rock and the story behind it. Everyone knows about it. It's on everyone's blog about St. Mary's. St. Mary's does the opposite of what St. Michael's did with ours.
Right.
In Royal Oak. They let it be known. I mean, they had the rock in front of the jail cell and now in front of the Historical Society. They let it be known.
Yeah.
Like, that's how it should be, That's a cool legend to attract people to St. Mary's, for one thing.
And I think that also, the difference between the two stories that we're going over tonight is that in the Moll Dyer legend, you have someone who, I mean, it's such you have a really climactic story.
Oh, yeah.
Where, you have this witch or supposed witch who's kind of an outcast, and then all of a sudden all these bad things start happening and the town gets worked up into a frenzy and burns down her house and essentially causes her death.
Yeah.
And in Talbot County's case, or plain dealing, when both of those two witches that were supposedly in that area, there's no real arc to the story.
Yeah, one goes missing and one goes to jail and gets let go.
Right. I think the one that went to jail and got let go is kind of less interesting. It's more, you find more historical references to that because we have court records and stuff like that, which was interesting to read through. And just the fact that she's from the area that Katie Colburn is also from makes it interesting. But Katie Colburn, I think, is actually the more interesting story in that because she's well known as not only, it wasn't like, there was one instance of Virtue Vile who supposedly made this woman waste away and left her speechless. That was one incident. There weren't a whole lot of other things that made people think that she was a witch. Whereas Katie Colburn was a well-known figure in the area, apparently, even though there's not a whole lot of historical record about her. There's enough in the zeitgeist back in the time to pass down in stories to say that she was this, kind of terror on the local area. And then all of a sudden she goes missing, just like that, totally gone, can't find her anywhere. And
She probably
immediately,
got the heck out of Dodge.
I would imagine, maybe, or she might have gone off somewhere and died in some accident or something, or got, I doubt she got kidnapped, but maybe there's some kind of missing Moll Dyer story there too, where maybe they...
Well, what is the time frame there?
So roughly 75 years after Virtue Vile. So we're talking like the 1760s, 17...
Yeah, never mind then.
60s, 1770s. So it's way after Virtue Vile, but maybe there is some missing tale there where, the reason she went missing was people did away with her.
That could be. Maybe
they just took her away and, did whatever they did with her. But I didn't find any reference to that. Not even anybody trying to insinuate that happened. But yeah, that would definitely add more flavor to the legend if we could find something like that. But according to the record, she just disappeared. And that's interesting because directly after that, you had the ghost story.
Right.
That's kind of tenuously linked to it just because of the timeline.
Yeah.
But in Moll Dyer's case, that's a whole encapsulated story by itself.
Yeah.
That is interesting and dramatic and definitely reverberated through time because, we have that. For one thing, The Rock. I think that's interesting because that is a direct
That's
tie.
a tangible thing that people can, see, for
right.
one thing, and they can feel The Rock, and you're allowed to touch it. People have pictures with it all the time. And
yeah, you can literally touch a piece of the story.
Yeah, supposedly. Right. So I think that definitely creates a stronger link that we don't have in plain dealing. So I think that's the reason why it has remained a much more relevant story. Yeah, probably. The other weird thing about The Rock is some people, the feelings they get around it. Some people say that their stomach hurts, they feel uneasy, and sometimes the camera, like when you take a picture of The Rock, sometimes the Rock won't be in the picture. or the camera will malfunction, just small stuff like that. And one report that I read from a guy, he said that nothing happened to his camera. I took pictures of The Rock, everything was fine. But is that just people adding to the story, or is it true? That's because that's very well could be just people adding to the story.
Oh yeah, but even if it is, it's fun.
Oh yeah,
it's an interesting link to the past, if nothing else.
Yeah,
even if it's not the real Rock, just the fact that it could be, or that people think it is enough to keep it in the zeitgeist.
Yeah. Yeah, this story I wanted to do this one because it shocked me so much how barbaric it was. Unlike the Salem witch trials or the trials of plain dealing witches and stuff like that, where it was, a lot more formal for the most part. It was until, the Salem witch trials till the end. But It was a lot more formal back then for those. And then all of a sudden, this one is just like I said, barbaric.
Yeah.
They want her gone. They don't want anything to do with it. They just want to end it there. So that's what really caught my attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the Salem witch trials, I think if you really just read the bald accounts of it, it reads almost like a modern day court case.
I mean, they have the Crucible.
Right.
I read it in 10th grade before I even really got into Salem witch trials.
Yeah. And it's more, I mean, it's a court case, really.
Yeah.
With convictions and executions. Whereas
Moll Dyer is just people going nuts.
A tragic story.
Just people going nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's still, to this day, people are still seeing effects from this, reported seeing her and getting car accidents and all kinds of freakies, like the lightning strikes still happening for some reason around there, in that general area. It's real strange. But no, this story was really cool to kind of unwrap and unravel. And I still like how there's still hauntings going on still today. Like there's still a freakiness around it. And I like that a lot.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes it interesting and gives you a tie to the past, almost like The Rock, when you feel like you're living part of the legend.
And some people get scared, like the thunderstorm story, when the group of friends went out on a nice sunny summer day. They went out in the woods and it started thunderstorming, and they took off, getting out of the woods, getting out of the rain, of course, getting out of the thunderstorm. And as soon as they broke the woods line, it was sunshine again, storm was gone, everything.
That's bizarre.
It was fine. Yeah, it's strange. It's real strange. Makes you think.
Yeah.
Is there really some kind of curse there, or is it just happenings?
Yeah.
Or people just making up stories?
Yeah, just coincidences or Is there something more to it?
But that's the interesting part of digging into the stories.
Yeah.
Not much historical evidence is found on the woman called Moll Dyer, but one thing is for sure. After that cold winter of 1697, Leonardtown would never be the same town again. This is the story of Moll Dyer.
This concludes tonight's episode of the Black Flame Podcast. Be sure to check us out on Instagram at the Black Flame Podcast.
Stay tuned for more episodes and stay spooky.